Yo, book nerds, we need to call on the muses for this one. I've got a book review for you. I finished the Iliad by Homer, and oh my gosh, I loved it. I have so much to say about this, but wonderful, wonderful. I cannot believe I have not read it before now. I was missing out. For sure, I was missing out. And I'm so glad that I finally read this. So this book was written by Homer, and it's what I consider an ancient classic. It was written over 2,700 years ago, and my edition has been translated from Greek by Enos Rees. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I apologize if I'm not. But I found this translation to be very, very good. It was easy to understand. It flowed beautifully. This is an epic poem, and it maintains the poetry format, and I really, really liked it. It was beautiful language, is beautifully translated. I really liked this. So what is this about? The word Ilium is another name for Troy, which is an ancient city. You probably heard of the Trojan War. Pretty common to know what that is. This is about the Trojan War. So Ilium means Troy. The Iliad is literally the poem of Troy. Like I said, this is an epic poem. I was actually nervous to read this because of it being an ancient classic. I was afraid that it would be difficult to understand, but it really wasn't. I was so captured by it. And I also knew the story, which made it easier. I've seen the movie Troy, which doesn't follow this exactly, but it is a retelling of the Trojan War. And because of that, I knew like the basics of what happens. And I also knew a lot of the names. So a lot of the Greek and Trojan names were very familiar to me already. So I didn't need to learn them. I already knew them. So that was actually very helpful. There is also a lot of repetition in this book between stanzas. Like you'll have one person say, go tell this to this person. And so that person will go and then tell it exactly word for word. So you'll get that repetition of the words. So like there's just, that happens a lot. So there's a lot of repetition. So you get things more than once. But like I said, this is about the Trojan War. So I knew the story going into it, but in case you don't know what it's about, basically it's a war being fought over a woman. That's what it boils down to. So you have the Trojans against the Greeks, and you have a prince of Troy, Paris, who is the cause of all of this. He went to Greece and he fell in love with Helen, who was already married. She was married to King Menelaus, and he basically takes her back to Troy and marries her, and Menelaus is mad that his wife is gone, and this war is the result because he wants her back. So that is basically the Trojan War in a nutshell, and the war has been going on for 10 years. But this story is not specifically about the Trojan War, even though it's called the Iliad. And we know this because of the first stanza. It basically tells you exactly what this book is about. So I'm going to read it to you because it's a pretty famous opening. Sing, O goddess, the ruinous wrath of Achilles, son of Peleus, the terrible curse that brought unnumbered woes upon the Achaeans and hurled to Hades so many heroic souls, leaving their bodies the prey of dogs and carrion birds. The will of Zeus was done from the moment they quarreled, Agamemnon, son of Atreus, and godlike Achilles. So basically, this story is about Achilles' wrath. It's not even just about Achilles. It's about his wrath. We're calling on the muses at the start of this. I love that. That is the traditional Greek beginning of an epic story, calling on the muses. And so basically it's saying like, tell us the story about the wrath of Achilles, who was quarreling with King Agamemnon. And King Agamemnon is the brother of King Menelaus, whose wife was stolen. So before we get into all of this, though, I just want to add a little note. Like, it's a little confusing if you're not familiar with the way the Greek kingdom is laid out. Like, basically you have like all these like clans, and there's a king for each of them. But then you have King Agamemnon, who's kind of like the head of all of them. He's got the most power and he's above all the other kings. And so when King Menelaus, his brother, loses his wife, King Agamemnon is obviously mad, and so he takes his clan and all the other clans to Troy to fight to get her back. So you'll hear a lot of references to different kings when you're reading this, and they are all kings of their own little like clan. So it's a little different than what most people are probably used to. But this is about Achilles' wrath. So if you go into this story expecting to get the Trojan horse, or even to get the death of Achilles, because you know Achilles has this famous death with his heel and everything, you're not going to get that. So I'm just telling you right now, I don't even consider that a spoiler, because if you go into it expecting that and you're not going to get it, you're probably going to be disappointed, because that's not what this is about. This is about Achilles' wrath. We know that from the first stanza. And I'll be honest, I kind of missed that when I read it. I mean, I read that part, but I didn't really process that that's what this was going to be about. So I was a little bit disappointed that there is no mention of the Trojan horse, and we don't see Achilles' death in this story. So I'm just throwing that out there right now for you. We also have the whole argument of whether Troy was a real place or not. This story is definitely mythology, because you have Troy, but you also have gods involved in this conflict. You have Greek gods playing parts in this story. So this is definitely not historical. I do believe that it has been determined that Troy was actually a real place in modern day Turkey. I'm not a historian, so I might be wrong on that. But this story is not like fully historically accurate, because we've got all the gods mixed in and mythology mixed in. So yeah. But overall, I loved this. There was lots of action. I couldn't put it down. It always had me on the edge of my seat wanting to read more. I just really, really enjoyed this. This was definitely a 5-star read for me. I loved Achilles. I hated Paris. I hated him so much. I loved Achilles, and I loved this story. And I want to dive in deeper. So like, I'm going to talk about stuff, but like, this story is so common, I don't know that you can really say it's a spoiler alert, but just be aware that there might be some spoilers to things as I talk about them. First off, I really thought it was interesting to read about how women are depicted from this time period. They really are just objects. They are things to own. And I just can't imagine living in that time. Women are trophies. They are prizes. They are things to have and own. They really have no control over what happens to them. And that's really scary when you think about it. So that kind of leads me to wonder if Helen really wanted to go with Paris or not. Did she run away with him? Was it a moment of weakness or not? Or was she abducted? Did she really have a choice in going with Paris? It's an interesting thing to think about, because she does seem to be attracted to him. So that's there. But she also does have moments where she's missing her old life and her old husband. She even says that she left a daughter behind. So in book 3, line 156, these words of the goddess aroused in the heart of Helen an irresistible yearning for her former husband, her city, and parents. And then in that same book, book 3, at line 192, but now I wish it had been my good fortune to die when I came here with your son, deserting my marriage chamber and daughter so precious, my blood relations and circle of charming friends. So like, she's wishing for death. She's missing her old husband, her old friends, her daughter. Like, how did you leave your daughter? Like, as a mom, I could never. But how much choice did she really have being a woman who was an object? Literally, there are other scenes where women are just taken as prizes. There are some games later on in the story, and one woman is a prize, and she's even valued as less than a cauldron. They would rather have the cauldron. It was worth more than the woman. So like, how much did Helen really have a say in all of this? Not much, I'm guessing. You have this other woman named Briseis who was taken as a prisoner of war, and she is given to Achilles, and I'm going to talk more about her in a second, but she has no say in any of this either. There's also a lot of talk about what happens to the women of Troy if they lose this war. They will be enslaved, their husbands will be killed, their children will either be enslaved or killed, like they will be taken from their homes. Like, that's so scary. Like, as a mom, if someone took me and killed my husband and killed my children, like, I can't even imagine the pain. I can't imagine what that would be like. It's very scary. And there are also very gruesome depictions of war in this story, like very, very graphic descriptions. You have descriptions of like spears going into people, piercing certain organs. Like, you get these descriptions a lot, like piercing facial organs and body horror, and it's very, very descriptive and gruesome. So if that's not something you can read, maybe don't read this, because there is a lot of that. But it really shows that war is fought up close and personal back then. It's very different than the way war is right now. Obviously, war right now is still very gruesome, and it's just different. You're not physically stabbing someone with a spear or a sword nowadays. Like, that's just the way it was back then. Like, everyone clashed, hand-to-hand combat. It's bloody, it's gory, it's really intense. Nobody is safe. Not even children in the womb are safe. There are no laws about not hurting civilians. Like, anyone is fair game. Even babies in the womb. There's a quote I want to share about that. In book 6, line 58. Soft Menelaus, what do you care for the Trojans? Did they do you any favors that time they stayed in your home? Let none of them escape unholy destruction from us. Not even the baby in his mother's belly. No, not even him, but let all Trojans utterly perish, unmourned, unburied, and leaving no trace. So it is intense. It is very, very intense. Like I said, stakes are high. The gods are involved, and the gods kind of use humans as pawns. They don't care about a lot of humans, but then they also have their favorites, and they are easily changeable. They hold grudges. Like, it is easy to upset the gods, and that can change the tide of the war very quickly. It goes back and forth on who's winning at like the flip of a switch. So like, that adds another layer too. Immortality is constantly mentioned in this book. The gods are immortal, people are mortal, they die. And in book 6, line 155, I believe, it says, the frail generations of men have scarcely more lineage than leaves. Wind blows the leaves to earth in the fall, but springtime comes and the forest blooms. So one generation of men gives way to another. So in the grand scheme of things, all these people are going to die eventually, and new people will come and take their place, but the gods will remain. Like, that is a constant theme throughout this book. And just like that quote that references leaves, there is a ton of metaphors and similes throughout this epic poem that relate humanity and battles and people to nature and to wild animals. And they are beautifully written. When I read this, I really felt a lot of pity for Troy, because the Trojans really didn't do anything to cause this war. It was all Paris. Paris is a selfish boy, and he saw a woman that he wanted and he just took her with no regard for the consequence, with no regard to his people. He's one of the princes. King Priam of Troy is one of his sons, and he does not care. He will not give Helen back to save his people. He's just a selfish, cowardly man. So everyone suffers because of him. And honestly, I feel like the Achaeans, the Greeks, they are justified in fighting this war because he took one of their wives. Like, why would you do that? Paris also wants to fight Menelaus, and they make an oath that the winner will take her home, and Paris loses, and he doesn't honor his oath, and he continues to keep Helen. So of course they are going to be mad. they are not, Paris is not a man of his word. He's a coward. Then, in contrast to Paris, you have Hector, who is his brother. And Hector, a different prince of Troy, is everything that Paris is not. He is honorable, he is valiant, he is noble. He loves his wife, would do anything for his wife and child. And he loves his community, and he defends it with everything he's got. He fears what happens if they lose the war and his wife and child are taken or killed. He really puts everything into this battle. And then, of course, you have Achilles, who is my favorite. I love him. Sorry, Taylor. I love him. Achilles is flawed. He is flawed, but he is also noble and honorable, and he sticks to his principles. And so, he is very, very real, and he's not afraid to show emotion. So I had mentioned before Briseis. Achilles loves Briseis, and he actually wanted to marry her, but King Agamemnon decided that he wanted Briseis, so he took her from him. And that obviously pisses Achilles off because he wants his woman. So there are scenes where he's yearning for her and he wants her back in book 9, line 378. But from me, and only from me, he has taken and kept the bride I adored. He's not afraid to show his emotions. And a lot of times in modern day, when men show their emotions, they're seen as sissies. But Achilles is not seen as a sissy. He is very masculine, very manly. He's the best warrior that they have. And he loves Briseis, and he's not afraid to say it. Achilles also has an extreme friendship with Patroclus and loves him. Some argue that they are lovers, others say they're just best friends. I can see both arguments, but either way, Achilles is still seen as very manly, even though he has this deep love for Patroclus, and I like that. I like that he's allowed to have emotions. Men are allowed to have emotions, people. You also find out that Achilles has two fates, so he has a choice to make. And so his two fates are that he can either return home and live a long life, but nobody will know who he is. No one will remember him. He won't have any honor or glory. The other option, the other fate, is that he will die young, but he will be remembered forever. He will have honor and glory. He will become immortalized in time. And so those are his two fates that he is struggling with. And he is pretty much leaning into the second one. He wants honor and glory, and he's not really caring if he lives a long life. I do find it interesting, the parallels between Achilles and Menelaus, because Menelaus's wife was taken by Paris, and that whole situation leads to war. And Achilles' bride, Briseis, is taken by Agamemnon. It's a very similar situation. But instead of leading to another war between the Achaeans themselves, Achilles is like, I am not fighting anymore at all because you took my woman. And so their best fighter is sidelined because of his rage. He's so mad at Agamemnon for taking Briseis that he will not fight. And while I found this very noble and honorable because he's standing on his principles, it also has very bad consequences. Because he's not fighting, a lot of Achaeans are dying because he's not there to help them. And Achilles is flawed. He holds on to this rage way longer than he should. And people are dying, and instead of joining the fight again, he sends Patroclus to go fight for him. In book 16, when Achilles sends Patroclus out to fight, he says a prayer to the gods that Patroclus will win honor and glory, but will return safely to him. He says that prayer, but that is so ironic for him to pray for when he himself has those two fates, and they can't mesh. You can't have honor and glory and return safely. Those are at odds with his own fate, and so it's foreshadowing. Obviously, it's not going to end well. And honor is everything back then. They put so much value on honor. There is a line in book 15, line 658. Be men, my friends, and stout of heart. Fear nothing in this great struggle, but dishonor before each other. Of men who shun dishonor, more are saved than slain. But flight is a poor defense and wins no glory of any kind. So you have to kill people and keep fighting to win glory, and that's so important. If you turn around and run, you are shameful, you're a disgrace. And another part of this is when you kill somebody, you want to take their armor. So that like kind of threw me off when I first read it. Like in the middle of this battle, they're stripping people of their armor that they kill. Like it seems a little like you shouldn't waste that time. Like you might be killed trying to do that. But they do that because if you kill someone and you have their armor, it's like a badge of honor. Because it's like, I killed them. I have their armor now. Look how strong I am. So that was interesting. But anyway, as Patroclus is going out to fight while Achilles is still stewing in his rage at Agamemnon, some very important things happen and they're very interesting and got me thinking. So I want to mention them here. I'm trying to find it now, but I'm really struggling to find where it was. But I wrote a note about it, but I forgot to put the page number. But there was a point where I can't remember who it was. Somebody was charging again and again, but Apollo, the god, told him to stop. He literally shouts at him, "Fall back." And like, imagine being in a fight and then a god yelling at you, how terrifying that would be. Like, I can't imagine how terrifying that would be. I don't know why I can't find it right now, but there is that line, and that is really, it really struck me like, oh my gosh, yes, there are gods in this fight and they are yelling at you, and that would be very scary. And then you have the death of Patroclus too. And Patroclus is killed by Hector, and as Patroclus is dying, he says that Achilles will avenge him. And that part too is also very like scary, because everyone knows, the Trojans, the Achaeans, they all know that Achilles is the best fighter. And so like if I were Hector and I heard Achilles is gonna avenge me, like, oh my gosh, I'd be terrified. Like, wow, I would be so scared. I would not want him mad at me. I would not want to be on his enemy list. And then when Achilles does find out about Patroclus's death, his best friend, maybe his lover if you see it that way, he is so sad and he mourns for him for so long. And again, he's still seen as manly. He isn't seen as like a baby, a sissy, like some people today would think. Like, he is still very much the best warrior, very manly, and he's mourning his best friend. The way I took it was him and Patroclus were best friends because he refers to Briseis as his love and as the woman he loves, and he only ever refers to, in this translation, he only ever refers to him as his close friend and comrade. And so I didn't see it as a romantic relationship, but a really close friendship. But other people in other translations might depict it a little differently. But that's just the way that I read it and took it based off of this translation. But still, he is intensely grieving. And as someone who lost their best friend, I know how intense that grief is. So it's totally believable. And so, yeah, he's grieving and sad and he's mourning. And this is again where Achilles is flawed. Like, he goes out and he does kill Hector. And he takes his vengeance. But it doesn't stop there. He keeps defiling the body and it angers the gods, and he just vents his rage on the body, and it's not good. It's not good. As much as I love Achilles, like, this is not okay. And he's doing this because he's in such intense grief, and he takes Hector's body and he doesn't let the Trojans bury it. And then you have the beautiful conclusion of this story. You have King Priam coming to Achilles, knowing he could die, to ask for his son's body back. And Achilles says to Priam in book 24, he says on line 647, "But you must bear up, nor can you afford to grieve without ceasing." He tells that to King Priam. Achilles, who's been grieving for so long about Patroclus, he tells King Priam, you can't grieve without end. And so he needs to take his own advice there. And Achilles does end up giving Hector's body back to King Priam so that he can bury it. And that resolution, that like catharsis is so great. Achilles even grants King Priam 12 days to bury the body, where he will not fight, where he will keep the others from fighting, so that there is peace during the burial. And just that honor for your enemy is beautiful. And seriously, the catharsis of releasing that anger and rage and letting things go and moving past them is very beautiful. And that is where the story ends. And so it's kind of an abrupt ending if you don't know that this is seriously about his rage. This book is all about Achilles' rage. He's raging against Agamemnon, and then he's raging against Hector, and then it ends when Achilles lets go of all that rage. Now that I have finished the Iliad, I have started the Odyssey by Homer. I am nowhere in it. I've literally read like 2 pages so far, but I do plan to read this next. And after reading this, it reminded me of something I read in undergrad. I had read the Oresteia, which is about King Agamemnon after the Trojan War and his family. And I had read it, but honestly, I remember very little from it. And this has made me want to get that. I don't currently have an edition of it, and read that again as well, because since I hadn't read this before reading that, I feel like I will have a much different take on it now than when I read it for undergrad. So I may read that after I read the Odyssey. I also really want to read the Aeneid, because that is Virgil's like response to these books. So like I have plans, we'll see what shakes out, but for sure I am reading the Odyssey right now. That was a lot. I just had a lot to say about this book. I just had to get it all out because I really, really, really loved it. And I think that this is a beautiful story about grief, a beautiful story about love and sorrow and war, and it's just, oh, it's so good. You can clearly see why this has survived the test of time. It is a great story. So I encourage you to read it if you haven't. I can't believe it took me this long to read it. Love, love, love. Anyway, drop down in the comments and let me know what you think of the Iliad, and I will talk to you there. Hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks for talking books with me.